What others observe before they trust or doubt you. You think trust is earned through your words, through what you say about yourself, through the promises you make or the credentials you present, but that's not how it works. Trust is decided before you finish your first sentence. Sometimes before you even speak. People are reading you in ways you're not aware of, not through what you're saying, through what you're doing, through patterns you don't notice, through signals you're not consciously sending. And by the time you're trying to convince them you're trustworthy, they've already made up their mind, not based on logic, not based on evidence, based on observation, based on dozens of micro signals that told them whether you're consistent, whether you're certain, whether you're hiding something, whether you're performing. And the uncomfortable part is this. Most of the signals that create doubt, you're sending without realizing it. And most of the signals that create trust, you're probably not sending at all. Trust is not rational. People like to think they evaluate trustworthiness logically, that they look at track records, credentials, references, and those things matter. But they matter later. They matter when someone is trying to justify a decision they've already made emotionally. The actual decision, the gut-level assessment of whether someone is trustworthy or not, happens much earlier. It happens in the first interaction, sometimes in the first moment of observation. And it's based on pattern recognition. The brain is constantly scanning for congruence, for alignment between what someone says and how they carry themselves, between what they claim and what their behavior suggests. And when there's misalignment, when something doesn't match, the brain flags it, not as a conscious thought, as a feeling, a vague sense of discomfort, a subtle doubt. And once that doubt is planted, it colors everything that comes after. Every word is filtered through suspicion. Every action is scrutinized for ulterior motive. And no amount of explanation, no amount of reassurance fully erases it. This is why people who try too hard to appear trustworthy often achieve the opposite effect. Because the effort itself is a signal. It signals insecurity. It signals that they're aware they might not be trusted. And if they're aware of that, there's probably a reason. Think about job interviews. There's always someone who answers every question perfectly. Their responses are polished, rehearsed. They maintain eye contact. They smile at the right moments. They give examples that demonstrate exactly the qualities the interviewer is looking for. And yet, something feels off, not because they said anything wrong, but because the presentation is too smooth, too controlled. And that control suggests performance. It suggests they're managing an image rather than simply being present. And the interviewer, even if they can't articulate why, feels the disconnect. They might hire the person anyway based on qualifications, but the doubt is there. Quiet, persistent. Compare that to the person who pauses before answering, who admits when they don't know something, who gives answers that aren't perfectly structured but feel genuine. They might be less impressive on paper, but the lack of performance creates trust, because it signals they're not hiding anything. They're not crafting a version of themselves. They're just responding honestly. Or think about relationships. The person who constantly reassures you they're loyal, who tells you unprompted that they would never lie to you, who emphasizes their honesty in ways that weren't asked for. And every time they do it, the reassurance lands differently than they intend, because you weren't questioning their honesty, but now you are. Because why are they so concerned with convincing you? Meanwhile, the person who never mentions their trustworthiness, who simply acts with consistency over time, builds trust without effort, not because they're saying the right things, because their actions and their words align. And that alignment removes the need for reassurance. On the surface, trust seems to be built through positive actions, through doing what you say you'll do, through showing up, through being reliable. And those things do matter, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is congruence. Congruence is the alignment between your internal state and your external presentation. When what you're feeling matches what you're showing, people sense it. When there's a gap, when you're performing confidence while feeling insecure, or projecting calm while feeling anxious, people sense that too. They might not be able to name it, but they feel the misalignment, and that feeling creates doubt. This is why people trust children more easily than adults. Not because children are more honest, but because children haven't yet learned to hide their internal state. What they feel is what they show. And that transparency, that lack of performance, reads as trustworthy. Even when the child is being difficult, even when they're misbehaving, you trust that what you're seeing is real. Adults, by contrast, are constantly managing their presentation, hiding discomfort, suppressing frustration, performing interest when they're bored, projecting confidence when they're uncertain. And all of that management creates a layer of artifice, a distance between who they are and what they're showing. And that distance, even when it's subtle, is what people pick up on. What most people miss is that trust is built more through what you don't do than through what you do. It's built through restraint, through the absence of certain behaviors that signal insecurity or manipulation. For example, not over-explaining. When you make a decision and someone questions it, the instinct is to justify, to provide reasoning, to convince them it's the right choice. But over-explanation signals doubt. It signals that you're not fully confident in the decision yourself. And if you're not confident, why should they trust it? The person who states their decision clearly and then stops, who doesn't feel the need to justify unless directly asked, projects certainty. And certainty creates trust, not because the decision is necessarily better, but because the lack of justification signals that the person has already worked through their doubt internally. They're not processing it in front of you. They're not seeking your validation. They've decided, and the decision is final. Or consider not seeking approval. When someone constantly checks in, constantly asks if something is okay, constantly seeks confirmation that they're doing the right thing, they're signaling that they don't trust their own judgment. And if they don't trust their own judgment, you can't trust it either. The person who acts without seeking approval, who makes decisions and moves forward without needing external validation, creates a different impression. Not arrogance, just self-trust. And when someone trusts themselves, it's easier for others to trust them, because they're not asking you to carry the weight of their uncertainty. Think about the colleague who sends a message and then follows up 10 minutes later asking if you received it, then follows up again a few hours later, then apologizes for bothering you. Each follow-up is meant to be helpful, considerate, but what it actually communicates is anxiety. It communicates that they're not comfortable with uncertainty, that they need reassurance, that they're managing their own discomfort by transferring it to you. And over time, that pattern erodes trust, not because they're incompetent, but because their anxiety makes them unpredictable. You don't know if they'll handle pressure well. You don't know if they'll hold steady when things get difficult. You don't know if they can sit with discomfort without needing immediate resolution. Compare that to the person who sends a message and waits, who doesn't follow up unless there's an actual need, who trusts that if their message was important, you'll respond when you can. That restraint, that ability to tolerate uncertainty, signals stability, and stability creates trust. Or think about someone asking for a favor. There's the person who asks and then immediately starts justifying why they need it. I know you're busy, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, and I totally understand if you can't, but I really need this because the justification is meant to make the request easier to accept. But what it actually does is weaken it, because it shows the person doesn't believe their request is reasonable. They're defending it before you've even responded. Contrast that with the person who simply asks, "Can you help me with this?" and then waits for your answer. No justification, no apology, just a clear request. That directness signals confidence. It signals that they believe the request is reasonable and they're comfortable with whatever answer you give. And that comfort makes it easier to say yes, because there's no pressure, no guilt, no performance. Over time, the accumulation of these small signals becomes a reputation. Not a reputation you're aware of, not something people discuss openly, but a quiet consensus about whether you're someone who can be trusted or someone who requires management. And once that consensus forms, it's difficult to change, because people interpret your future behavior through the lens of that consensus. If they've decided you're anxious, they'll see anxiety even in your calm moments. If they've decided you're uncertain, they'll see uncertainty even when you're being decisive. If they've decided you're performing, they'll see performance even when you're being genuine. This is why first impressions matter, not because people are shallow, but because the brain is efficient. It forms a model of who you are based on early data, and then it uses that model to interpret all future interactions. Updating the model requires significant sustained evidence to the contrary, and most people don't provide that evidence. They continue operating in the same patterns, and so the model persists. And the tragedy is that the behaviors that create doubt are often the same behaviors people think will create trust. Being extra helpful, being overly available, being excessively reassuring, these things feel like trust-building actions, but they're not. They're anxiety-driven actions. And what they communicate is not competence or reliability. They communicate need for approval, need for validation, need for certainty. Watch how someone responds when they're criticized. Not major criticism, small criticism, casual feedback, an offhand remark that implies they were wrong about something. Some people absorb it without reaction. They listen, they consider. They either accept it or quietly reject it without making the moment about themselves. Others immediately defend, immediately explain, immediately redirect the criticism back toward the person who offered it. And that defensiveness is a signal, a clear one. It tells you that their self-image requires protection, that they can't tolerate being wrong, that their confidence is fragile. And when someone's confidence is fragile, you can't rely on it, because fragile things break under pressure, and pressure is exactly when you need someone to hold steady. This is why the most trusted people in any environment are rarely the most vocal. They're not the ones rushing to demonstrate competence. They're not the ones explaining their reasoning before anyone asks. They're the ones who remain stable when others become unstable, who slow down when others speed up, who speak less when others are speaking more, not because they're withholding, but because they've learned that restraint is more powerful than expression, that what you choose not to say carries more weight than what you say. There's also the question of how people talk about others when those others aren't present. This is one of the clearest signals of character that most people overlook. Not because it's rare, because it's so common that people stop noticing it. When someone speaks critically about a person who isn't in the room, they're not just sharing information. They're demonstrating something about themselves. They're showing you how they think when they feel safe, how they talk when there's no consequence. And if they're willing to do it about someone else, you register, quietly, that they'll do it about you too. The people who generate the deepest trust are rarely the ones who offer the most interesting commentary on others. They're the ones who say very little about people who aren't present, not because they have no opinions, but because they understand that speaking about absent people is a low-value activity. It gives you temporary connection with the person you're speaking to, but it costs you their long-term trust, because they've now seen something about how you operate. Over time, people notice who restrains themselves in these moments, and who doesn't. And the ones who restrain themselves consistently build a reputation as someone who can be trusted with information, someone who won't use what they know against you, someone who processes their opinions internally rather than broadcasting them. And need, in the context of professional or social dynamics, creates doubt, because people trust those who don't need them, who can function independently, who can tolerate rejection, criticism, or indifference without destabilizing. Those are the people who feel safe to rely on, because their stability isn't dependent on external validation. Most people believe they're being read based on what they say. They think that if they explain themselves clearly, if they articulate their intentions, if they provide the right information, people will understand them accurately. But people don't trust your words. They trust the alignment between your words and everything else. Your tone, your pace, your body language, your energy, your patterns over time. And when there's even a slight mismatch, when your words say one thing but your behavior suggests another, people trust the behavior, always. This is why lying is so difficult to sustain, not because people are good at detecting lies through logic, but because maintaining congruence while lying requires extraordinary control. You have to manage your words, your tone, your facial expressions, your body language, all simultaneously. And most people can't do that. Something leaks. A micro-expression, a slight hesitation, a tonal shift, and the person watching picks up on it, even if they can't consciously identify what changed. But the opposite is also true. Like when you're telling the truth, when you're being genuine, when there's no performance, maintaining congruence is effortless, because there's nothing to manage. What you're saying is what you're feeling. And that alignment comes through, not as something people analyze, as something they sense. What most people miss is that the absence of certain behaviors is more powerful than the presence of trust-building actions. Not reaching out constantly, not apologizing unnecessarily, not seeking validation, not over-explaining, not performing enthusiasm. These absences create space for the other person to assess you without interference, space for them to notice your consistency without you pointing it out, space for trust to form naturally rather than being forced. Because trust, real trust, is not built through convincing. It's built through observation, through watching someone over time and noticing that they do what they say, that they hold boundaries, that they don't change based on who's in the room, that they're the same in public as they are in private, that their words and actions align. And you can't convince someone of that. You can only demonstrate it, quietly, consistently, over time. And the demonstration only works if you're not performing it, if you're not aware of being watched, if you're simply operating from a place of internal consistency, regardless of who's observing. Eventually, people sort themselves into two categories in the minds of others: those who are trusted by default, and those who have to continuously earn trust. The first group operates with a presumption of competence. When they make a mistake, it's seen as an anomaly. When they make a decision, it's assumed to be sound. When they speak, people listen. The second group operates under scrutiny. When they make a mistake, it confirms existing doubt. When they make a decision, it's questioned. When they speak, people are evaluating whether to believe them. And the difference between these two groups is not competence. It's not intelligence. It's not even experience. It's the pattern of signals they've been sending. The first group has demonstrated congruence, consistency, restraint. The second group has demonstrated anxiety, performance, need. There is also a subtler pattern that creates doubt. It has to do with the relationship between what people claim to value and how they actually behave. Everyone has a stated value system, things they say they believe in, principles they claim to operate by, but behavior under pressure reveals the actual hierarchy, not the stated one, the real one. And when those two things don't match, when someone claims to value honesty but softens every truth to avoid discomfort, or claims to value loyalty but becomes distant when association becomes inconvenient, or claims to value accountability but always finds a reason why a mistake was someone else's fault, the gap is visible. Even when people can't articulate what they're seeing, they sense the gap, and the gap is where doubt lives. What makes this difficult is that most people are not consciously aware of their own gaps. They genuinely believe they are the things they claim to be. And that sincerity makes it harder to correct, because they're not lying. They're just unaware. And unawareness in an adult, particularly in someone who presents themselves as self-aware, reads as a deeper kind of dishonesty. Not intentional, but real. The people who build lasting trust are not the ones with the most impressive stated values. They're the ones whose behavior under pressure matches what they claim when conditions are easy, who are patient when patience is inconvenient, who are honest when honesty costs something, who remain consistent not because they're performing consistency, but because they've internalized it deeply enough that pressure doesn't reveal a different version of them. That kind of person is rare, and because they're rare, they're recognized, not loudly, quietly, by the people who are paying attention. And once you're in the second category, moving to the first requires more than just changing behavior. It requires changing behavior so consistently for so long that people forget the old pattern, that they overwrite their model of who you are. And that process takes time, more time than most people are willing to invest. So they stay in the second category, always working a little harder, always needing to prove themselves a little more, always wondering why others seem to be trusted more easily. There is no technique for this, no method, no set of behaviors you can adopt to manufacture trust, because trust is not built through what you do. It's built through who you are, through the alignment between your internal state and your external presentation. What matters is awareness, becoming aware of the moments when you're performing instead of being present, when you're managing an image instead of simply responding, when you're seeking approval instead of trusting your own judgment, when you're over-explaining instead of letting your words stand on their own. And in those moments, noticing the impulse and choosing differently, not rigidly, not as a rule, but as a practice of restraint, a practice of letting silence sit, a practice of trusting that if your actions are consistent, you don't need to explain them, a practice of allowing people to form their own conclusions without trying to guide them. Because the more you try to convince someone you're trustworthy, the less trustworthy you appear. The more you perform confidence, the less confident you seem. The more you seek approval, the less worthy of approval you appear. Trust is built in the space where you're not trying, where you're simply operating with internal consistency, where your words and your actions and your energy all point in the same direction, not because you're managing them, but because there's nothing to manage. Because what you're presenting is what you are. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to suppress your personality or hide your humanity. You just need to stop performing. Stop managing the perception. Stop trying to convince people of what you want them to believe. Because people don't trust your words about yourself. They trust what they observe, When you're not trying to be observed, they trust the patterns that emerge over time. They trust the alignment between what you say and what you do. They trust the absence of performance. And if you can operate from a place of internal consistency, if you can let your actions speak without needing to narrate them, if you can tolerate being misunderstood without rushing to correct it, trust forms on its own, not because you built it, because you stopped preventing it. And the people who doubt you, the ones who remain skeptical no matter what you do, are often reading something real, something you haven't admitted to yourself, some misalignment you're not aware of, some performance you think is invisible. And maybe the question isn't how to convince them. Maybe the question is whether they're seeing something you need to see too.
A lot of women have written to me from The Art of Seduction, some complaining, and I feel bad. Mostly they say, your book really helped me see through this really evil guy who was trying to manipulate me. I saw that he was using some of your tactics. I saw through him.
Wow.
And it helped me. I'm fine with that because a lot of it is just opening up the game and showing you how people operate in this world. And I think there are there are obviously malevolent seducers out there, probably more men than women, but there are women who use it for nefarious purposes as well.
Yeah.
So
we've been taught by men.
Huh?
Nothing.
Quick list, Robert. What are the anti-seducer qualities that quickly make people uninterested?
Well, I call it the moralizer. So seduction is not a realm of morality, right? Okay? It's an arena of playfulness. It's theater, okay? And you're enjoying yourself. It's a realm of pure pleasure. And if you're always judging the other person, oh, you said that? You believe that? Oh, I can't believe it. Or you're wearing those clothes? That's incredible turnoff, right? So the moralizer. Drop all of that. Drop all your judgments and be completely open to the other person. There's none of that involved in here. There's no good or bad. Okay. The second thing is generosity, not being generous. So not paying when it could be man or woman, but being very niggly and cheap with your money, with your gifts, etc., and being ungenerous with your attention and your time. But being generous with your time and your attention, your money, is very, very seductive. Okay. I call this the bumbler. There's somebody who's always thinking about themselves and did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing?
Self-centered neurosis.
Yeah. That's very anti-seductive. This might not be true anymore when I wrote the book, but I had the character of the vulgarian who's very vulgar and
everyone's vulgar now, Robert.
I know.
How do you pick? How do you choose?
Yeah. Also, people who talk too much. This is something that men will have more than women, the mansplaining kind of thing, where they know so much about everything. They know about cars, stereos, wines. They can tell you exactly what you're doing wrong, etc. Talking too much and thinking that you know everything is very, very anti-seductive. These are a few of the qualities. I know there are like 5 more, but I don't want to bore the hell out of you. But you get the general idea.
It's very interesting.
That's very helpful. How did you reform yourself from your 20s as a rake?
Well, it gets tiring and it also gets a little bit pathetic. Warren Beatty maybe be able to get away with it, but when you're like in your 40s and your 50s and you're still like a rake and you still have that mentality, I think it feels kind of pathetic. It feels kind of like, and it's also sad because you're going to be lonely. When you're in your 20s, you're having a lot of fun. You're not worried about loneliness because there's so many different women you're involved with, but eventually you maybe either want a family or you want to settle down and you don't want to have this kind of chaos in your life. And you're facing a life where you're going to be alone a lot. So facing those kind of factors, thinking this is kind of pathetic a little bit and it's tiring. And I had my moment. I whatever the expression is, I made hay when the sun was shining. Part of the expression. It's over, all right? I'm getting older. It's not such a bad thing to get older. And I found a woman that I've been with now for a while, and she basically reformed me. She put the collar around my neck, and she tamed and domesticated me.
Was it an easy transition? I've heard, some people who have lived a certain way and then transitioning to that other way, when you start to become more close with someone, when there's an increase in vulnerability, it becomes challenging, and it could be easy to be, oh, wait a second, that other life was maybe a little bit lonely, but a lot of fun and exciting, and I didn't have all these emotional challenges that I'm having now.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And you're always lured back into being a rake again, unfortunately, because you do have very pleasant memories, et cetera. So it is a challenge. You have to work on yourself, and you have to grow, and you have to mature a little bit and understand that if you're fooling around, that you're not going to have that relationship that you want, that you think is very important, you need it very much so. So the woman I'm with, we have a very deep connection intellectually and emotionally. And, we kind of help each other very deeply in each other's work, et cetera. So we're invested very deeply into it. So, you weigh that factor and you go, that's much more important than those momentary pleasures I had in my 20s. Now, not all men are going to feel that way, but that's my particular journey.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the involvement in each other's work and helping each other in that way, and the intellectual connection, I think, is something to look for in partnership.
I have a question, and I know it's not necessarily fair to make you sort of comment on current, dating practices, because, none of us are really in that current pool. But I do think in the framework of what we're talking about, of seduction and power, and, sort of that interplay, many people are having, non-monogamous relationships. They're polyamorous. Right. And, I'm fascinated by this just because I think it's very interesting. And, what I hear, from a lot of women is like, two can play at that game. And if he wants to have lots of partners, like I should too. And I'm a sexual person and so is he, and, all these things. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit to where that kind of comes into this notion of, is that a reaction to men being rakes? Is it, is this something that women experience in the same way? And, at what point is there a neurotic or compulsive feature to the need to have multiple partners? Does that come into any sort of understanding of power or seduction that you can understand?
Well, everybody is different. Some people, I think maybe it is a healthy thing where they just have an incredibly powerful sexual drive, mm-hmm. and they want different partners, and they found somebody. So I don't like to judge with broad strokes like that.
And sometimes it's not just the sexual connection. It's like having committed, intimate relationships with more than one person. So.
Yeah. But then there's the sex addiction part of it that becomes compulsive, where you're dealing with issues probably stemming from your childhood, probably stemming from your connection to your mother. Mm-hmm. I know you probably heard of Neil Strauss, wrote The Game. He wrote this book where he tried to get out of the game, where he called The Truth. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Where he tried to reform his ways as a pickup artist. And he went to these retreats in Arizona, and they taught him all these things about who he was and why he has this compulsive need, et cetera. And he essentially reformed himself. So I think he did. I can't say for sure. But it came from an unhealthy place.
But you have to have self-awareness also to be able to access this kind of information, right?
Well, I think in his case, I'm
saying in general, not.
Yeah. But
sounds like he went through a rigorous process.
He did. He wanted to have children. He wanted to have a family. And he thought I don't want to be someone's, constantly sleeping around and trying to also have a family. I don't know. I'm not going to go into how he thought. But as far as women, I do believe that men and women are different. I'm sorry to say that.
It's a very radical notion.
I know it is. And I think women think differently about sex than men do.
Generally speaking,
they have more at stake, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one egg a month,
Yeah. So the women that are involved in polyamorous relationships, I don't think it's the same as it is for a man. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't women that are naturally drawn to that kind of lifestyle, and I'm sure there are. But I don't think it's the same drive and the same, I don't think it's as prevalent as it is for men. Excuse me for saying that. I know I'm being a quote unquote radical gender essentialist here, but I do believe that it is different between men and women,
Mhm.
biologically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about mastery.
Yes. Mastery of seduction and power.
Well,
No, kidding.
they do interrelate. They do interrelate because you talk about people finding their life's purpose or finding their life's task. And in order to do that, you are able to have more agency and influence on your life potentially. But can you start us off, explain a little bit about the notion of finding a life's task to someone who may be like, well, I don't know if I have one.
Well, everybody has one. And of all of the chapters in all of my books, it's the most important one of all for fulfilling your life, for having what you want in this world. It's extremely important. And I believe I'm a complete egalitarian in that sense. I believe everybody is born with this capacity. Everybody is born with a life's task. And in the book, I kind of reduce it to genetics. The DNA that you possess has never been replicated in the past nor in the future. It is one of a kind. It is a mix of hormones, of chemicals that are completely unique. You are a unique phenomenon in the history of the universe. And it's something that may sound like a cliche, but if you think about it, it's very, very powerful. There has never been anybody like you. And you can add on top of that your parents, who also have their own uniqueness. They're raising you in a unique way with a chemistry that has never existed before. And you can also say that about your earliest experiences in life, the people that you interacted with. So you are a unique phenomenon in this world. And that uniqueness, what makes you different, is your life's task. Understanding what makes you different from everybody else clearly will indicate to you the career path that you should be following, should indicate what it is you should be studying in high school and college, and when you enter the work world. And it's, for a lot of people, I believe for every child, it's very clear, but you don't remember it, right? So when you're like 2 or 3 years old, you're attracted to things, I call them primal inclinations. Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, he called them impulse voices. You have these impulse voices that say, I like this fruit, I don't like that. I like this person, I don't like that person. You have these definitive tastes early on in your life. And a man named Howard Gardner wrote a book called The 5 Frames of Intelligence that I tell people that is very essential. That we associate intelligence with just intellectual power, but that's not true. There's intelligence in the body, kinetic intelligence. There's intelligence, a social intelligence to do with dealing with people. There's an intelligence that was with words and language. There's intelligence with patterns, which has to do with like math and music. There's kind of visual intelligence. And you have one of these, right?
Just like from doing nothing, just from being born.
Yes,
like you got one of them, right?
Genetically.
Sometimes
okay.
two.
Well, usually it's one,
Okay.
but there can be a second one that you could combine that with. So we could look at a great person like Da Vinci, and he has he's like visually oriented, very much so, but he also had that mathematical kind of brain, and he also had that visual intelligence of being able to design mechanical things. Mechanical intelligence was the other one I was thinking of. So you have that. You have that. It's almost we put too many words and labels on it. It's something that's deeply ingrained in you. It's actually a chapter I'm writing about in my new book, and I'm going back to the ancient Greek concept of the daemon, that you're born with a kind of a guardian spirit and a fate that you are trying to follow, and you have to key into what it is that separated you at birth. All right. So you have this, but what happens is you get 5 years old. Your parents are saying, oh, you should be studying this. You don't want to go into dance. You want to start playing a musical instrument. Your teacher starts saying you need to be studying, you need to get better at geometry, even though you can't figure out anything about math. Your friends start telling you things. Those impulse voices that you were hearing when you were 3 or 4 get drowned out by your parents, by your teachers, by your peers. You don't hear it anymore. You're 18 years old, 19, you're confused. You enter the work world, you haven't a clue anymore what it is that you actually love. Your parents say, go to law school so that you can make some money. You go to law school. You're like 29, you're 30, and you go, God, I don't really love this. I'm burning out, and you start taking drugs. You start getting into some bad habits because you're not connected to it. You don't love it, right? So it's something that everybody has. And I used in Mastery the example of Temple Grandin, a woman born with deep, deep autism, non-functional autism. At the age of 2, her parents were to commit her to a hospital where she'd spend the rest of her life, right? But she met a woman, a teacher, who thought she could teach this deeply autistic child language. And slowly she brought her Temple out of her shell. And she realized she had a fascination, like a lot of autistic people do, with animals, right? She had this deep connection, almost she could understand their language.
I mean, she revolutionized the way we think of slaughter and, and animals. I'm a vegan person, so we know about her.
Okay.
She revolutionized the way that we understand, essentially food production.
Yeah.
Because of her understanding of animal, psychology.
Well, she had a connection to cows that was just insane. She just understood them deeply at a very early age. So I say, if someone born with high level autism can find their way to a life's task, I'm not saying it's easy or that's for everyone, but it shows that everybody has this potential. So I'm 100% egalitarian in the belief that everybody, even from the worst background, has this potential. But it's a lot harder for some people to realize, I understand. But you have it. And I counsel a lot of people who say, I don't have any idea what that is. Help me, Robert, I'm completely lost. You have to go through a process that I try and lead them through. So I don't have as much time as I used to have to do this kind of thing, but it is a process. It's a process of connecting to who you were in your earliest years, to those impulse voices, to what excites you, to what doesn't excite you. And I believe if I had the time, I could do that for everybody that came to me for this. I've had a lot of success in doing it, but I understand why it's not easy. I always felt attracted to words and language in an obsessive way, almost an unhealthy way. I just loved word games, right? And I loved history, and prehistory was my obsession. So, I knew it from an early age, so it's easier for me to say that. But I understand a lot of people don't have that for various reasons. And there might be a component to people who understand it deeply and don't lose that connection. There might be a reason why some people have that, like an Einstein, like a Steve Jobs, like a Martha Graham, people that I highlight in the book. There might be a reason why some people hold on to it better than others, that is genetic or whatever, I don't know. But I believe everybody can find their way back to it if we go through this process.
Mime, what did you like as a kid?
Telling other people what to do. I remember being 3 years old and the girls wouldn't play with me because I was too bossy. And, when I think about sort of like, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to be a doctor. And then when I got to college, I wanted to be a psychiatrist and I didn't have the grades for med school. But yeah, I've always been interested in like therapy, talking to people, helping people, and I'm thinking like, gosh, was that related? As a 3-year-old, that's sort of managing and directing and being like, I want to play this way. I don't know.
It was 2 years ago, I think. Mime directed her first movie that she wrote.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't there on set, but when I was talking with her, she expressed feeling more at home and in herself on a set, which requires telling people what to do.
But being a director, meaning being in charge of every aspect of, meaning like the visual, I wrote it, so the words, like it was the best way of being bossy without it being an authoritarian.
I see this. What is the movie called?
It's called As They Made Us.
As They Made Us.
As They Made Us. It's with Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen.
Really? Oh, fantastic. Oh, I have to look it up.
Had some big hitters there. And Simon Helberg from The Big Bang Theory and Diana Agron. And it's, it's like a character kind of study, but a very, very small film. But it absolutely felt like this is why my brain was made the way
Yeah,
it was, because
sure.
I could see in angles, and like I, loved the cinematographer and being
Yeah,
able
yeah.
to work with him. And that was my favorite thing, was designing all these things. And I was like, is this what my brain, was kind of designed to
Also,
do?
therapist, as well
Yeah.
as telling people what to do, as
Yeah.
well as artist, as well as
Yeah.
visual. It kind of put all the
but
pieces
look,
together.
I think for a lot of women, I think of my mom's generation, I think of women probably for most of history, the proscenium was pretty limited, and you were raised, to have a certain set of skills that serve, I'm watching 1883, and I'm like, that was what women's lives were, like cooking, cleaning, making sure no one died, and having enough children so that when some died, you still had leftover, right? And so I think, like, gosh, what a blessed time for me to get to live in, where I got to go to college. It wasn't this novel thing. It wasn't
Right.
crazy that I wanted to get an education, or that I didn't feel the need to get married at 16 or 17.
Yeah.
And for people trying to find their life's task now or their life's purpose now, you've described connecting with what they used to like as children, re-identifying and reconnecting with that. You also talk about sort of viscerally in the body, understanding what those signals are.
Well, the signals are things that you love and things that you hate. So, going on my own life, as I said, I've had this visceral attraction to this day. Whenever I see something in the New York Times that has to do with our earliest ancestors, with things about the Neanderthals, I get this thrill that I just got to read it, because I'm so fascinated with this notion of who we were 50,000 years ago compared to now, right? Something from when I was 4 years old, but also things I hated. I hated working for other people. I hated office politics. I hated the bullshit going on. I hated all the game playing. I hated all the brown nosing. I hated it. I realized I never held a job in my entire life for more than 11 months, right? That's why I had 50, 60 different jobs. So now I don't work for anybody else, and I'm in heaven.
Is it that
I've died
simple?
and I'm in heaven. What?
Is it that simple? Like, what are the things that you viscerally like? What are the things that you viscerally hate?
Not
like,
that simple.
no, but I'm saying, is that a starting place? Because, I was just talking with my 18-year-old, and I was like, isn't it interesting that you're entering a phase of your life where you could, and he is a person who has really, both sides of his brain, running on a lot of cylinders. Like, he could say, I'm going to study science and I'm going to go to medical school, and like that could be your life. Or you could study philosophy and say, I'm going to write and I'm going to think. And like, we're at these points a lot of times in our life where, options are open. Like, is it that kind of simple? I mean, mostly I went to school with people who thought they had to go to med school,
right?
Because it's all that they were and in a culture that worships money and power, that is what drives a lot of people. But I really love this idea, and I think for those of us who are artists, like you play. We live in a play world. Like, as an actor, I literally like pretend for a living, which is a bizarre thing, to do. But that's sort of some of what artists are able to tap into, right? Like, I get to keep playing and seeing what moves me.
Exactly. So you have to make a living. You have to be somewhat practical.
Well, Scott Galloway, who we had on, says, don't pursue your passion. That's not going to be, what actually makes you successful and able to support yourself. Find the thing that you're best at, that you can do, even if it doesn't move you. And like, that felt very loveless to me.
I'm of the opposite perspective.
I know.
So
that's why you're here for longer than he.
Okay.
Because he made me cry.
Okay. Well, so you do have to make a living. You have to be practical. I understand that. But what you'd want to do is you want to think of your 20s as a period of adventure, as a period of trying things out. You don't want to have this kind of monorail, linear perspective. I've got to go to law school. I've got to make $100,000 by this, blah, 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 blah. You're not going to have any fun. You're going to burn yourself out and you're going to end up miserable.
But that used to be when women had to have your babies.
Yeah.
Now they're extending it. But many of us are geared towards like, I got to have a baby when I'm most fertile.
That's now in your 30s.
Well, I mean, I was just more conservative. I was, I
A
wonder
lot of
if-
women waiting until their 30s these days.
I know, but then you're geriatric after 35. Like they flag you. It's like you can't do a home birth. Yeah. After 35 is considered a geriatric pregnancy. Exit been in there a long time.
It's changing. It's changing.
Well,
I have a lot of female friends who've had children in their late 30s.
For sure.
Whitney Cummings, she's in her 40s.
But also, like, she talked about it. Like, the journey is not necessarily linear or smooth. It often involves,
okay, but
a lot of.
so
Okay,
what?
but go
She
ahead.
had her career.
Okay,
Look where
she had a
she's
great
at.
time. You're right. But
Okay.
she also, but people, and Whitney talked about this, she also was in a place where she had the, financial and cultural support to do that, for a lot of women. Like, I mean, look, you can't even have access to birth control or abortions, but we don't need to talk about that. But go ahead. 20s adventure. Good
well,
times.
I mean, even for a woman, like you're in your early 20s,
Yeah.
you can,
Yes.
and then by the time that you've kind of
Yes.
got skills and you're
Yeah.
ready to do something, you can have a child when you're 29,
Then they
28.
penalize you for leaving to have the baby. Sorry.
This is what she was talking
I
about
had
earlier
my
with
kids in
Law
grad.
10.
I had my kids in. That's right. Law 10 is coming. Robert's like, I changed my mind. You are toxic. You have infected the whole room and your entire field of neuroscience.
I haven't quite gotten there yet. Maybe eventually.
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Well,
I'll be quiet.
like my wife, she's a film director.
Yes.
Right. So she knows about what you're talking about the kind of the chaos and all the people. She knew that early on she wanted a career.
Right.
She wasn't a baby-oriented woman.
Right.
And so we opted not to have children.
Right. Which is a choice for some people.
And a lot of people do it. And in this world with climate change and with
everything,
there's a good logic behind that sometimes.
Right.
So women can always make that choice unless they feel very deprived by that because they are a baby-oriented person.
The pressure to be part of the baby-making, machine, it's enormous pressure.
Yeah, but I'm trying to tell you.
Have you seen those commercials? They look so happy.
You're not supposed to be giving into pressure.
100%.
You're supposed to be figuring out what you want. And if you are a social person, if babies are a deep need for you and it can be an incredibly wonderful experience, then do it. But to be someone who wants to have a career that feels the pressure and has a kid and is not very good mother or father, it's terrible.
It's very terrible.
So women should have that choice and there should be no pressure.
Right.
All right? Anyway.
20s, excitement, adventure, exploring.
But you have a reasonable idea of what excites you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you try different things. Mm-hmm. But there's a kind of a logic to it. There's sort of a parameter. It's not like you're studying philosophy and you're studying, carpentry or shoemaking. I don't know. I can't think of what the other thing would be. But there's a logic to it. There's a connection to it. But you're having fun. You're trying things out. You're not so worried about making money, right? I'm not being Scott Galloway here. The money will come if you figure out what you love. And so the human brain doesn't learn very well if it's not emotionally involved. You tune out, you burn out. You're not listening. You're not studying. You're not absorbing, right? And you can bullshit your way through that when you're in your 20s and your mind is flexible and open. You go to law school, you can learn it. But by the time you're 30, it starts boring the hell out of you and you're not learning and you're not developing, you're not evolving, you're heading towards a disaster. So you want to feed your mind, you want to have adventures within a certain framework. And then when you're 29, you're 30, you've got skills, things start to fit. You start to say, this is where I can go. I can mix acting with neuroscience. Mm-hmm. I can become a film director and a podcaster. Mm-hmm. I can combine these different things that I love. And you start finding it out and you've got these skills and you become creative instead of just absorbing information. And so nothing will happen positive in your life if you don't have that. I really honestly believe it. And a lot of people are disoriented and lost in their lives because they don't have a clue. They don't have any idea about this. And it's tragic. And they enter their 30s and 40s. By the time you're in your 40s, it starts to get a little too late in some ways. I think in your 30s, you can kind of, I wasn't 38 until I wrote the 48 Laws of Power.
That's unbelievable.
So,
There's something really interesting about your trajectory being 38 when you wrote the book.
Yeah.
You'd call yourself maybe a late bloomer in terms of finding that,
a very late bloomer.
which I appreciate because it also relates to something that you speak about, which is the notion of anxiety as a motivator and, your relationship with anxiety when things were not working for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what you were going through when it wasn't working and actually how that helped you, realize where you should go next? And it was somewhat divined that you found a path towards a book?
Well, it's weird. Life is strange. In the moment that you're doing things, you're not really aware of a pattern, not really aware of a fate or a destiny or any larger thing. And then in retrospect, you start seeing this. So who's to say that it's all illusion, it's all in your mind? But I don't believe so. I believe that I can discern a pattern looking back that actually was there. And so